The death of a tourist group, consisting mainly of students and graduates of the Ural University, is certainly one of the most shocking tragedies of the 20th century. There were 9 of them, and they died in a deserted area of the Northern Urals, Russia, in February 1959. The case opened in the wake of the mysterious deaths was declassified in 1989. Some materials from it were confiscated and have not been made public to this day. Many circumstances surrounding the deaths of the 9 tourists remain unexplained. On January 23, 1959, a tourist group set out from Sverdlovsk, a city in Russia, on a ski trip. The group was led by a tourist with extensive experience, Igor Dyatlov. As part of the trip, the participants were required to ski at least 300 kilometers across the northern part of the Sverdlovsk region and climb the Oika Chakur and Otorten peaks. Initially, there were 10 people in the group. They traveled by train from Sverdlovsk to Serov on January 23rd. They then reached Ivdel, and then by bus to the village of Vizhai. On the evening of January 26, 1959, in Vizhai, they boarded a passing truck to the settlement of the 41st quarter. In the morning of January 27th, the group continued the route, one might say, lightly. The fact is that the head of the logging site asked a local grandfather coachman with a horse to help the tourists, and they were able to load their heavy luggage into the sleigh. So the group reached the second northern mine. Here the tourists stopped for the night in one of the more or less intact houses. On the morning of January 28th, one of the group members, Yuri Yudin, had an inflamed sciatic nerve. His leg began to hurt, and he realized that he would not be able to continue the hike. It was decided that the group would continue the route without him. Yudin, having said goodbye to everyone and given his comrades his food and some warm clothes, returned back to the village. So there were 9 of them left. Yuri Yudin fell ill and left the route. Unlike his comrades, he lived to a ripe old age and died in 2013. It is also known that Dyatlov, when saying goodbye, asked Yudin to tell everyone that the group could return 2 or 3 days later. The weather and snow conditions simply did not contribute to rapid progress along the route. In general, it was originally planned that the group would return to Vizhai by February 12th. From there, Dyatlov was going to send a telegram that the expedition was completed. But on February 12th, the group never showed up at the final point of the route. No one contacted in the following days either. On February 1st, 1959, the group spent the night on the slope of Mount Kolat-Syakhl, translated as Dead Mountain, or Mountain of the Dead, not far from the then nameless pass. Among the materials found later and developed during the investigation, there is a photo of them setting up a tent on the slope of the mountain. The time indicated is about 1700. On the night of February 1st to 2nd, although there are those who believe that in fact the tourists died later, in the period from February 2nd to 4th, something terrible happened on the slope of Mount Kolat-Syakhl. Not one of the 9 tourists survived that night. On February 22nd, 1959, search and rescue operations began, and a search party was sent along the route to these deserted places. On February 26th, a tent covered in snow was found on the slope of Kolat-Syakhl. The back triangular wall of the tent was cut from the inside. After the tent was dug up, many of the guys' things were found there. A homemade stove and buckets were at the entrance, and a few cameras were a little further away. Backpacks, documents, and geographical maps, diaries of the hikers, and a jar with banknotes were also found here. Food and several pairs of shoes were found closer to the opposite side. Other interesting finds include an ice axe found inside the tent and a flashlight found outside on the slope of the tent. There were no people in the tent. The tracks around the tent indicated that the entire Dyatlov group had left the tent, most likely through the cuts, and not through the main entrance. The people ran out into the bitter cold. It was about -30 degrees, without shoes and poorly dressed. They ran about 20 meters away from the tent. Then the tourists, in a tight row, moved down the slope. Moreover, they did not run away, but walked away at a very ordinary pace. The searchers noticed protruding mounds of snow. This is exactly what human tracks look like when there is a big snowstorm in the area. About half a kilometer down the slope, The tracks disappeared. The next day, February 27th, on the descent towards the Lozva River, approximately 1,500 meters from the tent and 280 meters down the slope, the first victims were found, Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonashenko. Both were only in their underwear. It turned out that Doroshenko had a burn on his foot and hair near his temple, and Krivonashenko had a burn on his left shin and left foot. There was a fire near the bodies. Later, about 300 meters away, Igor Dyatlov was found dead. He was slightly covered with snow, lying on his back, hugging a birch trunk with his arm. Dyatlov was wearing ski pants, a sweater, a fur sleeveless jacket, and a cowboy shirt. He had different socks on his left and right feet, wool on one and cotton on the other. Zenaida Kolmogorova's body was found 330 meters away from the group leader. The girl was also wearing warm clothes, but she was completely barefoot. In March, 180 meters from Kolmogorova, the body of Rustem Slobodin was found under a layer of snow. He was dressed quite warmly, and on his right foot he had a boot, put on over 4 pairs of socks. The second boot remained in the tent. A characteristic feature of the last 3 tourists found was the shade of their skin. According to searchers, it was red-orange. In the forensic medical examination documents, it was crimson. The other members of the group were found only in May, when the snow began to melt. At the same time, some of the bodies that were here had terrible injuries, apparently received during life. Dubinina and Zolotarev had 12 broken ribs. Later, an examination determined that such injuries could only be caused by a powerful blow, similar to a fall from a significant height. Dubinina and Zolotarev also had missing eyeballs. They had been squeezed out or removed. In addition, when Dubinina was found, she was missing a tongue and part of a lip. Many of the deceased participants had watches on their hands, and, interestingly, they showed different times. And another oddity, during the examination, it was discovered that some items of clothing, a sweater, harem pants, emitted radioactive radiation. The whole picture of the tragedy was full of oddities in the tourists' behavior. It is not clear why they did not run away from the tent, but walked away from it at a normal pace. It is not clear why they needed to light a fire near a tall cedar in an open area, and why they needed to break branches up to 5 meters high. How could they have received such terrible injuries? Why did not those who reached the stream and made sun loungers there survive? Because even in the cold it was possible to hang on until dawn? And the key question, what made the group leave the tent so hastily, practically without clothes, without shoes, and without special equipment? The funerals of the group members in Sverdlovsk took place from March to May, and on May 28th, the investigator closed the case. The ruling stated that the tourists' deaths were caused by some irresistible natural force. Among the numerous versions of the tourists' deaths, several main ones can be singled out. Among them are the avalanche of a snow slab, an attack by prisoners who escaped from a colony, the destruction of the group by the military or special services. Some talk about a quarrel between the tourists or voice versions of a strike by a powerful weapon, which was allegedly tested in the USSR at that time. Finally, there is a very specific and conspiracy version of a controlled delivery that Dyatlov's group allegedly met with spies from another country in the Northern Ural Mountains. Each of these versions deserves a separate discussion. There is a version that the cause of the tragedy could have been a domestic quarrel or a drunken fight between the participants of the expedition over girls. This fight allegedly led to severe violence and the subsequent tragedy. The conspiracy theory by Alexei Rakitin is quite popular. According to this version, several members of the Dyatlov group were secret agents of the State Security Committee. They were supposed to pass on disinformation related to domestic nuclear technologies, as well as a radioactive sweater, to foreign American agents disguised as another group. But the foreign spies accidentally gave themselves away during the meeting, after which they decided to destroy all members of the Dyatlov group. The exact cause of death of the Dyatlov group is still unknown, although 65 years have passed since the tragedy.